It didn't begin with Trump's threat to withhold federal monies. It began with Jewish supremacist billionaires who threatened to withhold alumni monies.
John, you work at Columbia University.
I do.
Speaking of clown cars.
Bill Maher just nauseates me. He's like the Pillsbury doughboy with horn-rimmed glasses. I was not happy when Professor Chomsky signed that Harper's letter.
It's just a belief that everyone else has their own state. This is the rationale, which isn't true. I don't have a state. Where's the Black American country? No.
Well, there's only one solution.
Norm.
Stop with the Jewish boyfriends. That's where I think the frustration came in him. It was like, don't you see where this is going?
With Bernie, I really struggle because we know that he knows. And because he's saying the right thing, except for targeting Netanyahu, except for Israel, instead of Israel. And so he's actually regurgitating, demonstrating complete facility with the facts that should be changing his position. When I've had debates with people, not Bernie, but other, kind of boomer generation Jewish folks who I desperately want to move on this issue, what I encounter is like this sort of, it's just a belief that everyone else has their own state. This is the rationale, which isn't true. I don't have a state. Where's the Black American country? No, there's like 400 languages spoken in India and they don't all get their own state. Like, what are we talking about? That's like not true. Anyway, but this idea that like every other group gets their own country except for Jewish people, and that to resist that is tacitly, implicitly anti-Semitic, and holding Jews to a different standard as every other group. And that because it is so important for Jewish people to have this thing that everybody else allegedly has, even if there are negative consequences, those consequences are worth being borne by Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
that is where we land every time. And that's why this Jewish supremacy language, I think, is very helpful to me now. It doesn't make the arguments go any smoother, I got to tell you, when I start saying those words. But like, that's what gets to the core of the issue. It's like, but what you're describing is, in fact, Jewish people arguing for a standard that is different and apart and superior to what other people are actually getting on a regional basis and globally, because as I've said, everyone doesn't get their own state. And it's being justified frequently on the basis of this horrible tragedy that is the Holocaust, but which does not warrant doing the same to other people. And I don't know, like I'm telling you, I've had this conversation with certain people in my life so many times. And I don't know how to get, like, I just think generationally, we're not going to get, like, I just don't think we're going to get past that.
well, there's only one solution.
Norm.
Stop with the Jewish boyfriends.
Okay, first of all, the person that I had in mind was not a partner or partner's parent, although I have had arguments with one partner's. I've had one Jewish boyfriend, Norm. I had one Jewish boyfriend, so shoot me.
I was trying to be pragmatic about this. You've obviously suffered a lot of anguish, a lot of angst, torment. So I feel like
LOL.
Instead of trying to convince, just walk away.
What am I supposed to do? There are all these nice. The younger generation's great. It's no. But actually, I was thinking of. I mean, I don't want to, pull her in, but we can all imagine who I might be talking. I'll say it to you, and we can bleep it out. I'm talking about. Is who like I mostly periodically on a semi-regular basis end up having this argument with. So I don't know what to do about that other than just like be hopeful and grateful that the younger generation feels differently.
Young generation is fine, except for those who they're brainwashed cohorts. Uh, there are cohorts that are brainwashed. There are cohorts who are just Jewish supremacists. And
And
uh,
that's, yeah,
and
yeah,
that's look. I don't want to get into a long discussion about this.
yeah.
Um, the problem is, you see, the Jewish supremacy. It's not just, yes, there is the chosenness aspect or the distorted understanding of the religious concept of Jewish chosenness. But I don't believe that's the main factor because when I was growing up, very few people were religious. You know, Chuck Schumer, there are things he says in the book which are factually correct, surprisingly. And there are quite a few which are just completely ridiculous. But, you know, he says when you grew up back then, bar mitzvahs where you had to learn some passage, uh, uh, passage from in Hebrew. And then it was mostly just flaunting wealth. It was a coming out party sort of thing in the Jewish community, where he said if you had the um, celebration in the afternoon, it was much cheaper than to have it in the evening. And so there was a hierarchy. Did you have your celebration in the evening or did you have it in the afternoon? And he said the only reason kids went to Hebrew school back then was just to learn the passage for the bar mitzvah. That's it. There was nothing else there in Hebrew school. It was they went to the Hebrew school once or twice a week to learn the passage. So religion uh, wasn't an aspect of Jewish life in my era, but they were very racist. Racist, of course, African Americans, the worst. The worst. I can tell you. I mean, that's why parts of what he said, oh, Jews growing up when I grew up, he meaning Schumer, when I was growing up, Jews all support civil rights. That's just a crock. It's not true. They supported in the South. But when it came to your own community, your own city, Jews fought tenaciously against busing, fought tenaciously against busing. And then the Black community, the African American community, concluded if they don't want to integrate with us, then we have no alternative except community control to make our own schools better. And then came the big clash between the overwhelmingly Jewish teachers union, led by Albert Shanker, versus the African American and also Latino advocates of community control. And that was the great 1968 teacher strike, which lasted 3.5 months. We didn't start school till the middle of November. It was really 2.5 months, September, no, 3.5 months. It was, and the hatred of Black people. Now, they claim the hatred of Jews came out during that. There was a famous, you remember the fellow who went by the name of Leroy Jones?
No.
Okay, do you remember Amiri Baraka?
Yeah.
Okay, so Amiri Baraka's name, he changed his name. Back then it was Leroy Jones.
Oh. Huh.
Uh,
Okay.
if you look at his old plays, I forgot, I see the cover in my head, but I can't remember the name of it. The Dutchman. You'll see that it's Leroy Jones. And he had recited this poem on WBAI, at that point, you know, the radical radio station in New York, WBAI, where Amy Goodman still speaks out of, WBAI radio. And the poem was called Hey Jew Boy. And it was ugly, you know, facts are facts. I'm not going to deny it. But I know the real Jewish community, not the one that has been fabricated out of the truly heroic Goodman, uh, Goodman
Cheney
Cheney. Oh gosh,
and Rice.
no. Goodman Cheney and
Schwerner.
Schwerner. Cheney was Black. Goodman and Schwerner were Jewish, and a whole mythology was created about that. You know, I'm speaking factually, and I'm not here to sort of like be a muckraker. Mine was the only family in the entire neighborhood, and this was upwardly mobile. They weren't rich yet. Like Schumer, he'll tell you 5 times in the book. In fact, the last sentence, the penultimate sentence of the book, which simply repeats what he says over and over and over and over and over again in the book, which is true. He says, a country, meaning the United States, where the Jewish son of an exterminator and a housewife could one day become the leader of the United States Senate. It's true. These were lower middle class people who went on to fantastical success. Fantastical success. My high school, as I suspect I've told you before, had not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, 6 Nobel laureates. Could you imagine a public high school? 6 Nobel laureates. We had, at one period of time, 3 senators who were sitting senators: Schumer, Sanders, and Norm Coleman from Minnesota. 3. The success
Didn't Ruth
was,
Bader Ginsburg also go to
Ruth
your-
Bader Ginsburg, Judge Judy, even what's her name? Oh God, my memory. The one who wrote "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow?" Oh, come on, A Natural Woman.
Aretha Franklin?
No, she sang it.
She's from Detroit.
Yeah, no,
Oh.
no.
Oh, who wrote it? Oh,
Carole King,
what's her
Carole
name?
King.
Carole King. I went
Carole
to see her
King.
musical with my mom for her 60th.
Yeah. So I'm not talking about obscure people from some backwoods in the South. Mine was the only family, the only one that referred to Black people by the proper name back then. I'm talking about the mid 60s, which was Negroes. It hadn't yet come Black or African American. Every other family, Schwarzer, which was, do you know what Schwarzer is? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Schwarzer,
Yiddish and
colored,
black. Yeah.
Schwarzer, the coloreds, or niggers. Every other family. That was part of the parlance. One of the fellows who went on, he became a very successful doctor in Washington. I think he's in the National Institute for Health. I could give his name, but it's not going to mean anything to anyone, so what's the point of it? So his mother was Phi Beta Kappa. I remember, these are little things you remember from as a kid. We had Black people were only allowed in the neighborhood as maids, as cleaning people. That was they were, otherwise they couldn't come in the neighborhood. We had a private bus line because the city buses didn't pass through our neighborhood. And they all left, the maids, the housekeepers, at 5 o'clock. And he would call that bus the Nigger Express. That's what he called it. And this was, as I said, not obscure people. This was the soon-to-be fantastically successful Jews. I had a friend, her name was Ellen Schoenfeld, and her brother Richard. I remember standing on the stoop with her brother and he being emphatic that all niggers should be thrown into gas chambers. And I remember, you see it in your mind's eye. I remember the mother and father sitting at the kitchen table behind the screen door, and no shock at a statement like that. That was what it was really like. So
And
now,
this is a conversation that's happening, 20 years after the Holocaust, in the memory of the parents of the kid that's behind him.
yeah, and he had no compunction about saying things like that. So now that brings me to the point I wanted to make about this Jewish supremacy.
Sure.
The point is that Jews were so fantastically successful, in particular in the United States, but also with gradations in Israel as well. And 90% of world Jewry, 90% is either Israel or the United States. Yes, 90% of all the Jews in the world are in those two places. And they enjoyed such fantastical, secular, earthly success that it's hard for it not to have gone to their heads. That sense of being superior. So the chosenness is sort of like another layer, but the foundation is that fantastical success. And it was deeply, not was, is deeply corrupting. And it's, so when they, the example you just gave of, well, the state of Israel has to come into existence, and some people are going to be harmed by it. Well, still, Jews need a state. It's because they believe that it's more important because it's Jews. They're Jewish supremacists.
That's what comes off in these conversations. That's what it feels like. And I got to say, as a Black person, I've been thrust into having some version of the conversation about equality, which is always on the fulcrum of like Black inequality and the relative superiority of various other groups. And I have had the experience of people coming to me not understanding why something was racist, like why a statement or a belief or something was racist. And I've simply I've taken the exact sentence that was said, but changed the word Black to, and in one case, I remember having this debate with a South Asian person, changing it to Indian. And suddenly it was very clear to him what was wrong with the statement. But he couldn't process it because he internalized that what was being said about Black people and inferiority wasn't in fact true. And on the same metric, I feel like there is this kind of positive stereotyping with Jewish people that is like so internalized that as folks are making these arguments in favor of Zionism, they're really not hearing how the exceptional standards that they're applying to one specific group that are in fact reflective of a superiority. And that's a very difficult thing to convey to people. But as someone who's been on the other side of that and the negative version of that, like it's very clear to me. And I'm sure it's like extremely clear to every Palestinian person, an Arab person, and Muslim person that sees how casually people are able to justify unequal treatment on the basis of one's religious status or race or country of origin when you're brown and Muslim and blah, 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 blah. So I really appreciate you kind of validating my choice to use that phrase and kind of normalizing it yourself. I do, before we wrap, though, want to come back to the reason that I ostensibly asked you to come on, which is related. And we've kind of been dancing around this a little bit. It is what we do now with the sort of criticisms of wokeness. Now that the Trump administration
has weaponized it.
Weaponizing it in this really incredible way. And I saw this clip of Columbia Professor John McWhorter on Bill Maher, which sat uncomfortably with me precisely because John McWhorter flipped what was a critique from Bill Maher, sort of surprisingly, of the authoritarian actions on Columbia's campus into they kind of brought it on themselves because of wokeness excuse making. I want to play the clip to refresh your memory, and then I want to get your
I've not seen it, so you can't refresh my memory. I'll be seeing it for the first time.
Okay, perfect.
All right. So, John, you work at Columbia University.
I do.
Speaking of clown cars.
I should say that I have been on a blissful sabbatical for the entire year.
Lucky you.
So I only know so
Okay.
much, but go ahead.
All right. Well, I mean, starting last week, Trump is going to war now on elite universities. Now, I cannot be a hypocrite. I went through my book that came out last year. It'll be out in paperback very soon. I can't be a hypocrite. I wrote down some of the things that I've said over the past that were gathered in the book. Don't go to an elite college. It makes you stupid. Elite universities are the mouth of the river from which manner all radical left illiberal, yes, illiberal nonsense flows. They're four-year daycare centers for the cry bullies of the privileged to complain about privilege. College today is not the college you remember. It's a day spa and a North Korean re-education camp put together. They're asshole factories. If ignorance is a disease, Harvard majority is the Wuhan wet market. Okay, so that's where I am. I can't, but I get the inclination, but as with most things now with this new administration, the way they do it, you can't do it by taking people off the street just because they wrote an op-ed pro-Palestinian. I'm not pro-Palestinian the way they see it either, but, or, you know, these people who are just disappeared because they have a tattoo. I'm so glad I don't have tattoos.
Bill, I should say that the kind of student you're talking about, in my experience, is a minority of the students. I don't see the whole campus as this, but there is a problem. I mean, frankly, Columbia has tried, for example, this year, to eradicate or at least dampen anti-Semitism. I mean, Manoush Shafiq did get 100 students arrested. You now cannot get onto the campus without a card, which is in order to protect, especially Jewish students, from having to listen to anti-Semitic protests all day long. The 3 administrators who were nakedly anti-Semitic in their texts were justifiably fired. But the thing is, I don't think this is really about anti-Semitism from the Trump administration. I think they care about as much about anti-Semitism as a kitchen cabinet or a spoon. What they are really upset about is just wokeness in general, and universities do have a problem with wokeness. That is a real problem.
Yes, they have a problem with...
If you have immediate thoughts, I'll let you get in there before I do.
I have a lot of immediate thoughts. I'll just zoom in on one. Problem of anti-Semitism at Columbia University. I was just recently, in the last couple of days, I was in correspondence with Bruce Robbins, who is a senior professor at Columbia. He's Jewish, extremely smart guy. And I asked him, I was at the encampments. I met with the people. I didn't notice any anti-Semitism. I asked him, he said, it's just all nonsense. He said, even the report that came out, the Columbia Task Force on Anti-Semitism, it was authored by 3 well-known pro-Israel professors on campus. They were selected for the task force. Actually, I have it right over here because I just printed it out yesterday. There was no evidence there. And even the Times Chronicle of Higher Education, the person who wrote the article on the report, he said, the goods aren't there. And to say, listening to anti-Semitic chat, you know, I'm sorry to have to say it, but I will be the one to say it. Mr. McWhorter is not very bright. He just is not very smart.
I'm not going to fight you on that one like I fought you over Obama.
There's no evidence. The smugness, just like Bill Maher's smugness, you know, the commonplace that conceit is just the face of insecurity. And it's the same with the smugness. Bill Maher just nauseates me. He's like the Pillsbury doughboy with horn-rimmed glasses. I find him so unbearable. He's reciting the lines, he says, and he has to read. I thought you wrote those lines. You didn't write those lines. Your writers wrote those lines. That's why you have to read them, and you can't even read them correctly. You know? But as I said, there is a problem. There were many problems with the wokeness, with the DEI. It stifled speech. It stifled the free flow of ideas. The classes, the reading lists, they were suffocating. I would just, because I don't like to speak in generalities. I think I was writing to somebody today, a student of mine. You're too much at the abstract. You have to go back and forth between the abstract and the concrete. Okay? Otherwise, you lose the reader. So I'm going to give you two examples, concrete examples. One of them is the woke reading lists. It really irked me. I have students who have high aspirations, and they're excellent students. One of them, 2 years ago, it looked like he was going to go away for 40 years because of wrong place, wrong time, wrong people. The judge gave him a second chance. It's called the second chance. He asked me to be his mentor. I told him, what do you want to do? I asked him, what do you want to do? He said, I want to be a criminal lawyer, first-rate criminal lawyer, he said. I said, what are your majors? He said, business and psychology. I say, forget that. That's not going to happen. You're going to major in philosophy and English. Philosophy because law is about reasoning, English because law is about writing. And 2 weeks later, I get an email from him. He said, I switched majors. To cut to the chase, he took the highest level courses. He took only one 100 level course. He just plunged into it. He has 23 straight A's, and he's now a finalist for a Fulbright to study medieval literature.
Amazing.
In the UK, and he's a Haitian immigrant. Now, why do I bring it up? What relevance is that? So at the beginning, the first few semesters when we were working together, we would go through the English literature, the offerings, the course offerings. I think they had one Shakespeare course. One. They had one British literature course. One out of maybe 100 course offerings. And it made me very angry. You know why it made me angry? Because all these liberal elites with their DEI, they send their children to schools like the one you attended, and they learn their Shakespeare, and they read the whole canon. Wait,
I don't know that I even read, I don't think I read any Shakespeare in college. I'm going to be honest with you.
Okay.
I don't think I took a single class that required me to read. I'm trying to think of what it would have been.
But you read it in high school.
Yeah, in high school.
And I read it in junior high school. We started in 7th grade with Julius Caesar. I remember it like yesterday, because I remember discussing Antony's speech and how Antony appealed to emotions and so forth. Okay.
Yeah, we had to memorize Friends, Romans, Countrymen at some point.
Right. Exactly. And in my senior year in high school, we had to memorize Hamlet speeches.
Yeah.
My point is, even if by some miracle they get into a top law school, they're so completely overwhelmed and shattered when everybody else is making references to Kant and references to Mill and references to Durkheim and references to Shakespeare and references to this and that, and they can't compete. They're unable because they're taking courses, and I can't even tell you the titles of the courses, the literature courses, because then I'll be accused of every kind of ism. But you can imagine the title of the courses they're being taught. And that's unfair to the students because it makes them uncompetitive when they strive for getting into top schools. It's unfair to them. And we would struggle going through. I say, don't take that, garbage. And then we would find one course or two courses. Fortunately, he had what's called a passport to take any course in the whole CUNY system. So he could go to the flagship schools, Baruch, Lehman, Brooklyn, Queens, Hunter. And so he could find the courses because it was over this whole system. What they were learning was junk by apparatchiks. But that's one problem. The second problem, which to me was a major problem, and you might recall, at the end of the spring last year, I don't know if we did any programs together, but I kept saying, this is the most the most outrageous, brazen assault in academic history in our country. And I was going from podcast to podcast, referring to the crushing of the encampments and everything that happened thereafter. And people looked at me like, oh, there's Finkelstein, the liberal, free speech, academic freedom, we're about the struggle. And I said, this is a catastrophe, what's happening. And they had lost the language of defending free speech because the whole woke culture was, if it makes you feel unsafe, unwanted, or uncomfortable, it shouldn't be said. Unsafe, unwanted, uncomfortable. And as you know, as a law school graduate, our whole history, beginning at the start of the 20th century, was defending any kind of speech, however uncomfortable it made you, to the point our Supreme Court ruled, in the face of a large mass of patriotic citizens, our Supreme Court ruled you had the right to burn the American flag as expressive speech. Our Supreme Court ruled you have the right to advocate the violent overthrow of our government. That is protected speech. Talk about unwanted, uncomfortable, unwelcome. The Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court in Illinois ruled that the Nazi Party had the right to march through a community of Holocaust survivors in Skokie, Illinois. I'll tell you, and I've said it several times, I worked for a radical newspaper. I worked for it was called The Guardian, a Maoist newspaper, okay? We're sitting there on the 12th floor talking about armed struggle to overthrow our government and institute the dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay, you might say crazy, fine. We wrote that every week in our newspaper, okay? Nobody ever thought it was illegal. We worried about agents provocateurs, but we never worried about that as being protected speech. I never worried about getting arrested for saying that. So now, to bring it up to the present, so I open up Chuck Schumer's book, Anti-Semitism in America, and he talks a lot about the genocide charge against Israel. The genocide charge against Israel. And if you read carefully, because of time, I can't go on longer. If you read carefully, why is he opposed to the genocide charge? He makes a few very, you might call it, superficial arguments. More Jews died during World War II, things like that, okay? But what's his main argument? His main argument is it makes Jews feel bad. Jews feel it's vicious. Jews feel like you're comparing it to what Jews went through during World War II. The whole argument, and as you know, he's a graduate of the same institution as you, law school, as you. But he has now weaponized that woke language and effaced, like the woke crowd did, that whole history of struggle to defend that right to free speech. That was a complete and total disaster. And this is not Monday morning quarterbacking. You have my book, I'll Burn That Bridge when I get to it. On page 37, I wrote, I said specifically to the Palestinians, I said, if you use the argument that Israeli speakers make you feel unwelcome, uncomfortable, and unwanted, Jewish students are going to use this, pro-Israel students are going to use the same argument. It's going to backfire.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.